Um, just want to do a quick video, and this one will be showing you how to work with pivot tables. And this is a recap of the stuff that we've done this semester with regards to pivot tables. So to just be a quick recap, nothing too detailed. You'll have the file. Check out the video in the same playlist that shows you how to download the files to use this for. So quickly, if I wanted to create a pivot table, I could create a pivot table from the recommended pivot tables. Remember, before you start working on a macro enabled workbook, all right, you have to enable content so that your macros are enabled. So you'll see that um, one of my worksheets here is for macros. So I have macros in this workbook. So I have to first click on enable content before I do anything else. All right. So now I want to create my pivot table from a recommended pivot table because I don't want to spend too much time working on my own pivot table. So to create a pivot table from a recommended pivot table, I select my data or click anywhere in my data. So you could also select the whole data set as such if you'd like. And then you go to the insert tab. Usually we use the pivot table here, right? Or the drop down there where you could create a pivot table from here. But in this case, I want to use a recommended pivot table. So I click on recommended pivot tables there. Okay. Once I am there for my recommended pivot tables, I choose the one that I want. I'm going to choose sum of total by sales type. All right. You can just read the names there, or you could point over it and you'll see the screen tip that shows you the name. So I'm just going to choose the first one, the first default one, and there we go. I click on OK. All right, so it creates that pivot table for me. Remember, you should be able to change the worksheet name, right? So whatever you need to do to change the worksheet name, use whatever method you know best. I won't dwell on that. And there we go. We have our pivot table. All right, so with your pivot table, you can add and remove um, items from the pivot table. For example, you could add sales ID to the columns as such, and you have the different sales IDs in the columns. You could remove it by unticking it, or you could remove it by right-clicking on or clicking on the drop-down for sales ID and clicking on remove field. Okay, and then also we could work on our value field settings. So in the values field, you could work on the field settings for that. So if you want to do number formatting, you want to give it a custom name, or you want to change the summary function that's being used there, because remember, pivot tables summarize your data. So you click on the drop down and you choose value field settings. So here we go. You could change the summary function here to any one of those. You could change the custom name. For example, here I'll change it from total, from sum of total to total as such. And then I could change the number formatting to apply the counting number format with 2 decimal places and the R symbol for the rand. So I click on OK and I click on OK again, and you'll see okay, total already exists, so I could call it totals. And I click on OK, and you see this is called totals now. So this column heading has been changed to totals. It now is the accounting number format as I asked it to do. So there we go. And then the next thing is maybe in my pivots worksheet here, I could want to get my totals or my grand totals um, for the different sales types, all right? And to get these grand totals, I could use the get pivot data function. So the simple way is that you'd come here, click in there, equals, and do not start the get pivot data function. You just go to the worksheet that has your pivot table, click on the one that you are interested in. In this case, I'm interested in auto renews total. So I click on that total for auto renew, and you'll see that the get pivot data function gets typed out for me automatically. Then when I press enter, you'll see that that total shows up. So you can do this for direct, you can do this for group, you can do it for online as well. So I'd leave that up to you to play around with that as well. And then after that, maybe in my pivot table, I would like a different field. So if I go back to my pivot table there, and maybe I want to add a new field to my pivot table. So to add a new field, you want to go to your pivot table analyze tab, and you'll see you have this field items and sets option or menu that you find in the calculations group. So if you click on that, you could create a calculated field. So in this case, maybe my calculated field will be called discounted. So I type in my name in there, and then I have to do my formula here. So I like to remove everything in there, and then I'll click on whatever fields I want to do. So in this case, and whatever fields I want to use. So in this case, I could want to use the total, right? So you click on it and you click on insert field, multiplied by 0.9 for a 90% discount, for example. So when I click on OK, you'll see that now I have the sum of discounted there, right? So which is calculated from that calculated field I created, right? So it also becomes one of the fields in my pivot table field list. All right, so that's how you use a calculated field. You can also work on the design of your table. Remember, in the table, in the design tab, right, you can change the design of your table. I tend to love very simple styles. If you've been in my class for this whole semester, you know that plain and simple things work well for me. So, for example, this could be a very nice style because it's not too loud. It's looking professional, for example. Okay, so that's how I like to work it. So, obviously, in a test situation, you look for the table style you're asked to use. You could also work on things like the report layout and the layout group of the design tab. So, report layout, maybe I could show it in compact form or show it in outline form. So it's just up to whatever you want to do. The grand totals, you could choose to switch them off or on. The subtotals as well, you could also choose to show the different subtotals. Um, and that's how you work with your design tab. So you can see there's all these options, so you can look around there to see what you can use. And then you could also create a slicer in the pivot table analyze. In the filter group, you could insert a slicer on a certain field. For example, maybe you insert your slicer on the um, policy type fields, and then you click on OK, and there you go. So for the different policy types, you could choose to just see the data from auto, or just the data for homeowners, or if you clicked on this option here, you'll be able to choose multiple, so auto and homeowners and disability, maybe just auto and disability, so I remove homeowners like that. And then if I wanted to see all the results without any filter, I just click on this clear filter option, and it goes over to select all of the fields, so that means there's no filter. So that's how you would work with your pivot table and your slicer. And then again, once you create a pivot table, you could also create a pivot chart. So if you select your pivot table and go to the pivot table analyze tab, you'll see that you have the tools group where you could create a pivot chart. So from there, you'll be able to create any sort of pivot chart you want to create. So maybe a clustered column would be nice, and you can move around your clustered column. All right, you could add elements to the clustered column. I like to add elements from the design tab of your chart. So you use add element here, and then maybe I could add a trend line. And I could choose the type of trend line, maybe to be an exponential trend line. All right, and it'll be to the sum of discounted. All right, so you'll see that the trend line is added onto there. So that's how you work with trend lines, and you can click on your trend line and you can format this trend line. Remember, you have the chart format tab or the format tab where you could choose what you want to format. So in this case, apologies for that, design format, yes, and then you could choose the trend line um, here, and then you say format selection, so that you get this pane on the right hand side, and you choose to format this by changing things like the type of type of trend line. Maybe you'd want to change the color and the weight and the width of the trend line. You might want to also work on the shape and the shadow styles, glow effects, and soft edges. That's okay. That's all up to you. And you can do this for any sort of element in the chart. It can be the title, it can be the bars, it can be the axes, and it can be the legend that you can work on using the format pane that comes up here. All you have to do is select what you want to format from this drop down, and then click on format selection, and you'll get this pane over there. Okay, so that's our pivot tables and a bit of pivot charts, and the next video will be about macros. So I hope this helps, and hope you listen to the rest of the videos.